Most people think the worst thing a family can hand you is a casserole they know you don't like. Mine handed me a contract, 18 pages of very good paper, a folder sitting beside the ham like it belonged there, 10 adults around a dining room table, a chandelier overhead that my mother had bought for a funeral and never taken down. They thought they knew who I was, a divorced daughter, a reliable girl, the agreeable one. They had forgotten I read for a living. By the time I reached for my pen, my mother had already stopped breathing. Welcome back to Story. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. I had been back in my own apartment for 11 months, which is about the length of time it takes a woman to stop flinching when the phone rings. The place was a one-bedroom above a dry cleaner on Ridge Street in Clarendon Mills, a town of 9,000 people, and one traffic light that blinked yellow after 9 o'clock at night. I'd taken the place 2 weeks after my divorce was final. The rent was $640. The ceiling sloped in the bedroom. The radiator knocked every March. It was mine. I was 41. I worked as a paralegal at Halverson & Pratt, a family law firm on the square, 2 blocks from the courthouse. I read documents for a living. I had miscarried twice during my marriage, and my family had treated those losses like missing socks. Misplaced, inconvenient, not worth tracking. That Sunday, I had tax returns spread across my kitchen table and the kettle on. The phone rang, which was not unusual because my Aunt Lillian called on Sundays. "Your mother has been quiet," she said, "in a way I don't like." I told her Mom was probably just tired. I said it because it was easier than thinking about what she meant. "Helena," my aunt said, "your mother does not do quiet. Your mother does strategy." I laughed. I put the kettle back on. Aunt Lillian had been reading weather for 60 years. She could smell a storm from a phone line. We talked about her orchids. We talked about the Mitchell's roof. She said before she hung up, "Easter's in 2 weeks." I said I'd be there. She said, which in our family was not agreement. It was a receipt. You women who have ever been handed a favor with invisible strings, you know already that the accounting will come due. The 6 weeks were the 6 weeks. 42 days, 4 loads of laundry, 1 accidentally shared conditioner bottle. I had moved into Margaret's guest room on a Tuesday in April the year before with 2 suitcases and a cat carrier I didn't need because the cat had stayed with my ex-husband. I had paid $900 toward groceries during that stay. I had cleaned her kitchen twice because cleaning a kitchen is how I apologize for existing in it. I had been gone by the 2nd Saturday in May. In my experience, a favor you didn't ask for is an invoice someone's already written in their head. Margaret had been adding interest since 1994. She had started mentioning it at Thanksgiving, dropped it into the mashed potatoes. "When you lived with us." I brought my own sheets. Margaret charged me the mattress anyway in narrative. By Christmas, it had become a full sentence. We took Helena in when she had nowhere to go. At Easter the year before this one, my cousin Bev had asked me if it was true I had stayed there a whole summer. I told her no. Bev looked at me like I was the one rewriting history. That was the thing about growing up in our family. You did not get to keep your own story. It was taken, rewritten, and read back to you with a new title page. I had let it pass. I had thought letting it pass was the same as being above it. By April, 1 year later, while I was pouring tea and listening to my aunt warn me about weather, Margaret had already started printing. Before I tell you what they did, I need you to understand that my sister was not a monster. My sister was a woman who had been told no 3 times by her own body. Margaret was 44, an elementary school principal at Eastview, the kind of woman who sent Christmas cards with a family portrait in matching sweaters, even without children in the frame. Especially without children in the frame. She and Trevor had tried for 10 years, 3 rounds of IVF, on an $18,000 out of pocket after insurance. Mostly from an inheritance our grandmother had left them when she passed in 2019, with strong opinions about great-grandchildren she would never meet. I drove Margaret home from her 2nd egg retrieval. I held her hand in the clinic parking lot while she cried over a bran muffin. I had genuinely grieved for her. You can grieve for someone and still refuse to fund their next idea. Grief in my sister was like a sourdough starter kept too long. Someone should have thrown it out. We kept feeding it. A body that has been told no 3 times does not always hear no when a 4th woman says it. I had overheard my mother the previous Thanksgiving in the pantry talking low to Margaret about next steps. "She isn't using her body for anything right now," my mother had said. She meaning me. Her meaning the body attached to me. I had stood in the hallway with a serving spoon in my hand. I had swallowed that sentence whole the way you swallow a pill sideways, knowing it was stuck, knowing it would work its way down eventually. I had not told anyone. I had not even told Aunt Lillian. I had been too busy being reasonable about it. My mother phoned on a Thursday, which was already the first warning, because my mother only phoned on Sundays. "Helena, honey, Easter dinner, 4 o'clock. Your father wants to see you." My father had not requested to see me in 11 months. My father was not in the habit of requesting. My father was in the habit of nodding. "That sounds nice," I said. "The whole family will be there," she went on. "Trevor's coming. Uncle Don is flying in from Ohio. We thought it would be nice, just a lovely evening, nothing stressful." I wrote the word stressful on my grocery pad. I underlined it. "Uncle Don is coming?" I said. "Oh, he had a trip anyway," she said, which is the sentence my mother has used for every coordinated ambush of my life. We talked about the ham. We talked about whether I'd bring wine. I said I would. In my family, nothing stressful has preceded every funeral, every firing, and one restraining order. After she hung up, I stood at my sink and let the water run for a while. My Aunt Lillian had said the word quiet. My mother had said the word family. My father had requested to see me, which was not something my father did. A woman who announces she is willing to sacrifice will, 9 times out of 10, arrive at the table with a list of sacrifices, usually yours. I dried my hands. I called my aunt back. I said, "I think we need to have coffee this Saturday." She said, "I've already made a pie." That was how we agreed in our family to prepare for war. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the firm's contract template library. I clicked on a folder labeled Surrogacy. I read for 2 hours. My Aunt Lillian had 3 rules for life: read your own leases, grow at least one thing that blooms in February, and never trust a woman who cooks a ham to negotiate. She lived 11 miles outside town on a farm her husband had left her when he passed in 2011. Orchids on every windowsill, purple on the south side, white on the east, yellow in the kitchen where the morning light came through a mason jar. My aunt grew orchids the way some women keep secrets, quietly, patiently, with a spray bottle and zero commentary. I drove out that Saturday. She had a cherry pie on the table and coffee already poured. "Your mother called me Tuesday," she said. "Asked me if I thought you'd ever considered having another baby." I set my fork down. "I told her I thought you'd stopped having that conversation with this family a long time ago," she went on. She said, "Well, Lillian, times change." My aunt looked at me with her pale, patient eyes. "Times do not change, Helena. People just get bolder." She told me then a story I had never heard, about being 19 years old, about a pregnancy she had been told to handle, about a choice her own mother had refused to use the word for. I will not repeat the details she gave me. I will only tell you that she had kept them inside her for 53 years and delivered them on a Saturday morning over cherry pie. When I stood up to leave, she squeezed my hand at the door. "Whatever they ask of you, read it," she said. "Don't just listen. Read it." I said I would. "Page 4, she said. "Things always live on page 4. Easter Sunday, 3:47 in the afternoon. I pulled into my parents' driveway. There were 5 cars parked in front of a 4-person dinner. My father's Buick, my mother's Taurus, Margaret's Forester, Trevor's F-150, and a silver rental Impala with a sticker from the Cincinnati airport, which meant Uncle Don had flown in and not told anyone it was for me. Uncle Don was my father's cousin, not my uncle exactly. A family lawyer in Ohio, not my mother's favorite, which made his presence louder. I sat in my Corolla for a minute. I counted the cars twice. There were 5 cars in my parents' driveway for a 4-person dinner, which meant my mother had invited witnesses, which meant my mother had invited a verdict. I got out. I walked up the concrete path, past the porch lilies my mother had set out at some point before noon, fresh from the flower aisle. I rang the bell. My mother opened the door too fast. Her smile was wide. She hugged me harder than she had hugged me in 3 years. "Sweetheart," she said. The word sweetheart had not been deployed since 2018. I filed it. Inside, the chandelier was on, bright at 3:50 in April. My mother's chandelier was bought for a funeral. It stayed. Trevor was by the sideboard, drinking an iced tea he was not actually drinking. He extended his hand. Trevor's handshake felt like a man trying to remember if he'd locked the car. Margaret was in the archway between the kitchen and the dining room. She held my eyes for 1 second too long. She wore a pearl-colored blouse I had seen her wear exactly once before, at her 10-year wedding anniversary. It was her asking for something blouse. Uncle Don gave me a small wave from the couch. He did not stand. He did not speak. And then I saw the folder, cream-colored, thick, placed on the sideboard beside the platter with the ham, as if the two belonged to the same meal. The folder had a small paperclip on the corner of page 1. Someone had taken the time to align it. In the living room, my second cousin's daughter, Ellie, who was 7, was watching a Pixar movie with the volume up. My mother had put her there on purpose. Ellie would not hear what came next. You sisters out there who've been called the dramatic one before you even sat down, you know what it means when the family closes ranks around a folder. We sat down. My mother at the head, my father opposite her, Margaret and Trevor on one side, me alone on the other, with Uncle Don 2 chairs down, spaced so the distance between us would feel incidental. My father said grace. My mother passed the ham. The ham arrived with cloves in a pattern I recognized from 1997, my grandmother's exact spacing. It was the only thing in the room that was not pretending to be something else. We talked about the Mitchell's roof. We talked about whether it would snow one more time. Margaret did not touch her wine. Trevor's leg bounced under the table at a rate I could count. My mother kept glancing at the sideboard where the folder waited. I ate a piece of ham. I ate a spoonful of green bean casserole. I drank a sip of wine. I waited. I had learned young that my family never came to the point directly. My family circled the point. My family asked about your job, your apartment, your car's mileage, and then, once you had exhaled, laid the point across your plate like a knife next to a fork. My mother cleared her throat at 3 minutes past 6. Helena, honey, your sister and Trevor have been thinking about something, a way forward for them. We wanted to talk to you about it as a family. I set my fork down. I smiled the polite smile I kept for firm holiday parties. All right, I said. Margaret reached toward the sideboard. She did not meet my eyes. Trevor looked at his plate. My mother's hands were folded under the table in her lap, which was her tell. She had done that in 1996 when she wanted me to quit the school play, and in 2004 when she wanted me to break up with a boy named Caleb Voss. Uncle Don took a long sip of his iced tea and did not put it down. Margaret reached for the folder. Trevor did not meet my eyes. I set down my fork, and I waited the way my aunt had taught me to wait. My mother had not taken a single bite of food. My mother spoke for 2 minutes and 40 seconds without taking a breath, which is how I knew she'd memorized it. Helena, we are a family. We have always been a family. We believe that family takes care of family. And right now, your sister is in a season of hurt. She paused in the exact place a paragraph break would have been. Margaret and Trevor have been trying for a baby for 10 years, 3 rounds. 3, Helena. You know, you were there, and your sister has been so brave. I nodded once, small, polite. There is an option, my mother went on. A beautiful option. Altruistic surrogacy. A gift of love between sisters. Modern medicine has made it basically safe. And you, sweetheart, are in a season of transition yourself. It could be a time of meaning, a time of family. I did not blink. Margaret's turn. She had a tear ready from the left eye, the way she had practiced. She reached across the table and took my hand. Helena, she said, you're the only one who can do this. Margaret had been practicing her suffering in the hallway mirror since 1989. By Easter, she had it down to a single tear from the left eye. Trevor nodded, said nothing. My father nodded, said nothing. Uncle Don swirled his iced tea. The ice had melted. I counted the times my mother had used the word family. 7. I let Margaret's hand stay on mine. I did not squeeze back. You're the only one who can do this, she said again, which, in my family, has always meant you're the only one we haven't already used up. I need a minute to understand what's being asked, I said. My mother's face changed. The soft voice dropped. Her jaw set in the way it had set across the kitchen table in 1993 when I had told her I didn't want piano lessons anymore. Helena, your sister took you in when you had nowhere. You owe her. The word owe. My mother said the words, you owe her, with the exact cadence she had used in 1996 when I borrowed her sewing scissors and forgot to put them back. I looked at my father. My father nodded. I looked at Trevor. Trevor looked at his plate. Margaret made a small noise, not quite a sob, a corrective. It's a gift, Helena, she said, not a payment, but we do hope you see what this family has done for you after everything. After everything. The divorce, the move, the fact that I had asked for nothing and been given a guest room for 42 days and paid my own way through it. I did not raise my voice. I did not raise anything. My face did not change. I had watched my Aunt Lillian run her farm for 13 years after her husband died, and I had learned from her that was not the absence of feeling, was the presence of choice. I folded my napkin. I set it beside my plate. I smoothed it once with 2 fingers. I asked to see whatever they had prepared. My sister's hand went to the folder before I finished the sentence. She brought it across the table like she was serving me a dish. And I understood right then that she had rehearsed that movement too, multiple times in this very room with my mother watching. The folder was 18 pages of very good paper, not printer paper, cream cardstock, 24 folios if I had to guess. It had been printed at a place that does wedding invitations. Someone had paid for it. The title page read, Altruistic Gestational Surrogacy Agreement. Underneath, in a smaller font, between Margaret Ann Caldwell, intended mother, and blank line, gestational carrier. The blank line was for my signature. They had not filled it in. That detail alone told me something. I'd like to read it now, I said, if you don't mind. My mother laughed once, a short, false laugh. Oh, honey, you don't need to read every word. Uncle Don had lawyers look at it. It's all standard. I looked at Uncle Don. Uncle Don did not look at me. I'm a paralegal, Mom, I said. You can always tell a contract written to intimidate. The margins get thinner around the clauses that matter. I know what you are, Helena, she said, and her voice had a small edge in it, like the lip of a can. I'm just saying we don't need to turn a family dinner into a courtroom. Trevor, very quietly. Let her read it. He did not look at my sister when he said it. My sister's head turned toward him 1 small inch and stopped. Guilt in our family was seasoned in gradually, the way you season a cast-iron pan. By the time I was 30, I had a mirror finish. I opened to page 1. I flattened the spine with the side of my hand. I began. The chandelier above me did not seem quite so bright. Uncle Don took a small cocktail napkin from the stack by his glass and pressed it against his forehead. He had begun to sweat. Page 1 was a cathedral, architecture of kindness, vaulted ceilings of gift and family and love. I read aloud. I read at the pace I read at work, which is 1 sentence per breath. Whereas the intended mother, Margaret Ann Caldwell, has undergone 3 unsuccessful attempts at in vitro fertilization, totaling $11,827. Margaret flinched at the number. I noted it. I kept reading. And whereas the gestational carrier, being a sister of the intended mother, wishes to provide a gift of love to her family, and the intended parents wish to receive this gift in a spirit of altruism. The word altruistic appeared 4 times before page 2, which in my line of work is roughly 3 times more than necessary. I have read worse contracts. I have never read one printed on nicer paper. The parties hereby enter into this agreement freely, without coercion, with full understanding of the rights hereby granted and waived. Without coercion. I did not say the word, I filed it. I kept my face still. I kept my voice flat. My mother had begun to look pleased with herself. My sister had relaxed her shoulders 1/2 inch. I have in my career read dozens of contracts that said without coercion on page 1. 90% of them went on to engineer the coercion by page 4, and wished to celebrate the miracle of family. I closed page 1. I pressed the crease. I turned to page 2. My mother said, "See? Beautiful, isn't it?" I said, "Mm-hmm." Margaret said, "It really is, Helena." My father nodded. Uncle Don was studying his iced tea like it owed him money. Page 2 introduced the money, which is where altruism historically begins to perspire. A list. Reimbursable expenses carefully itemized. $4,200 per trimester for maternity clothing, paid to Margaret. $800 a month for dietary supplements, paid to Margaret. Mileage to and from appointments, paid into a joint account in Margaret's name. Parking fees at the reproductive medicine clinic. Meals on clinic days, capped at $24. Nowhere on page 2 did money flow to me. I did not comment. I read on. Medical communications were to be handled by the intended mother. The gestational carrier hereby authorizes the intended mother to receive on her behalf all communications pertaining to medical care, prenatal testing, and clinical recommendations from the treating physician or physicians. On her behalf. I would not be receiving my own medical information. I would not be calling my own doctor. I would not be getting my own test results. I would be, legally speaking, a room with a refrigerator in it, to which my sister held the only key. In a paralegal seminar 3 years earlier, a family court judge from Columbus had stood at a lectern in a hotel banquet room and said the phrase coercion language to 300 of us over lukewarm coffee. He had drawn on a whiteboard. He had said, "You will know it when you see it, and you will see it most often on the 2nd page." I had written that down in a spiral notebook I still owned. I turned to page 3. Margaret corrected her posture. My mother dabbed her lip with a napkin. Uncle Don had not moved in 4 minutes. Somebody at a boutique law firm had charged my sister by the hour for the sentence that made my body a room with a lock on the outside. Page 3 asked me to hand over my body, one sentence at a time, by brand name. Mandatory diet, mandatory weight check weekly, mandatory bed rest starting anytime the intended mother's physician, not mine, recommended. Mandatory prenatal vitamin, brand specified, Natalist prenatal daily packets. No substitutions without written consent. Travel restriction. No drive exceeding 2 hours from my home of record without the intended mother's written authorization. Mandatory psychological sessions bi-weekly with a counselor selected by the intended mother. Clause 8. The gestational carrier agrees to abstain from all elective medical decisions without prior written authorization. I did not lift my eyes. My pulse stayed steady. My jaw did not. Let me tell you about the word altruistic. Altruistic is a very well-dressed word. Altruistic owns a good blazer and sensible shoes. Altruistic will sit across from you over honey ham and green bean casserole and look you dead in the eye while its other hand reaches across the table for your uterus and $118,000 worth of indemnification. Altruistic, in my experience, is the name greed chooses for itself when it's being photographed. I did not say this aloud. I said it only inside the kitchen of my own head, where my aunt was standing with a spray bottle, nodding. Clause 8 ended with the word authorization, which in this context meant permission, which in this context meant ownership. I turned the page. My father had finally looked up. He was watching me, and I could not read his face. I could only read that he knew this was the page before the last page. I could read that he had counted. That was when I understood my father had read this contract before Easter, and he had not told me. The dining room had gone the kind of quiet where you hear the refrigerator, and my parents' refrigerator was loud. I had not spoken in 4 minutes. Everyone had been watching me. Margaret tried first. "It's very standard, Helena," I said mildly. "It isn't." My mother reached for the soft voice again. "Honey, we can talk about any of it. Nothing's set in stone. We're just showing you what we have so far." I did not look up. Uncle Don cleared his throat. "It's all negotiable, of course." He said it the way a man says negotiable when he has been paid in advance. I turned the sheet. I was now on the last line of page 3. Trevor said low to Margaret, "Maggie." She did not respond. "You cannot sue a paralegal for reading." That was the thought I kept returning to. You can refuse to renew her. You can freeze her out of the family group chat. You can send a cousin to ask her if she needs a therapist. But the document itself, once placed in front of her, was legally and morally readable. And read I did. My father's hand was flat on the table now. His thumb moved once. I watched it. Somewhere behind me in the living room, Ellie laughed at the movie. A bright, oblivious laugh. The kind of laugh that reminded you that someone in this house was still small enough to be protected. I turned to page 4. My aunt's voice in my head. Things always live on page 4. I did not know yet what page 4 held, but my aunt had told me to look for it, and my aunt had a 60-year record for weather. I breathed in. I pressed the crease flat. I read, "I'm going to pause here for just a minute, because if you've made it this far, you and I both know what kind of evening this was becoming. If this story is hitting somewhere tender, if you've ever been through a divorce in a guest room, if you know how 6 weeks becomes 40 years in somebody else's ledger, if you've ever been told you owed a family member your body, your money, or your silence, please leave a comment below with the word porch, and I'll know. And if you haven't already, do go ahead and subscribe to Drama Story. I save a chair for you on this porch every evening." Now, page 4. Clause 10 was 12 words long. Most of the important sentences in my career have been shorter than a grocery list. Upon implantation, the gestational carrier waives all parental rights to the embryo, fetus, and resulting child in perpetuity and irrevocably. Someone had underlined the word irrevocably. Someone had, with a fine black pen, drawn a small line under it. Someone had felt it needed emphasis in a document being handed to the person whose rights it was stripping. Page 4. Pages 1 through 3 are for the cameras. Page 4 is always where the knife is kept. You sew a hem the way you say no to family. Small stitches, straight line, and you do not pull the thread once it's laid. I did not sew. I did not pull. I marked the margin with the tip of my thumbnail, just a small crescent, a paralegal's trick, not visible unless you knew to look. I did not look up. I did not react. Across the table, Margaret's hands had returned to her lap. Her mouth was a small straight line. My mother's eyes were on me like headlights on a deer. Most states do not allow a pre-implantation waiver of parental rights without counsel independent of the intended parents. This contract, by design, offered none. My signature was to be made at a dinner table in my mother's dining room across from my sister and her husband, with a family lawyer from Ohio watching his own ice melt. No independent counsel, no cooling-off period, no witness from outside the family. Coercion, the judge had said that morning 3 years ago, is structural. I pressed my thumbnail into the margin. I turned to Clause 11. Clause 11 was the one. Every contract has one, the clause whose author forgot that paralegals exist. The intended mother retains sole authority to select embryo characteristics, including but not limited to genetic sex, and reserves the right, at her sole discretion, to request termination of carriage prior to 24 weeks gestation should genetic screening results fall outside preferred parameters. I read it. Then I read it again. I did not breathe differently. I had trained myself in 14 years of reading documents in courthouse hallways to not change my breathing in public. Inside my chest, something small closed. A contract that asks you to host a pregnancy with a return window is not a gift. It is a rental agreement. I do rentals for a living. Genetic sex, preferred parameters, sole discretion, termination of carriage. Termination of carriage. 3 words that turned my body into a vehicle that could be pulled over and emptied if the delivery was the wrong color of wrapping paper. My eyes rose, slowly. Not to Margaret, to Trevor. Trevor had gone the color of dish soap. His lips were parted. His hand was flat against the table, like he was trying to steady a house in an earthquake only he could feel. I looked at my sister. My sister's expression had not changed. She was waiting for me to keep reading. She was not, I understood then, surprised by Clause 11. She had written it, or asked for it, or signed off on it. She knew. My mother reached for her wine, took a long, slow sip, set it down with a small clink against a water glass. I turned to Clause 12. My mother, for the first time that evening, would not meet my eyes. Clause 12 was the point of the whole document. Clauses 1 through 11 were the handle. Clause 12 was the blade. In the event the gestational carrier withdraws her agreement to proceed at any point following the execution of this document, she shall be liable for the full reimbursement of all prior IVF-related costs incurred by the intended parents in the amount of $1,184.27 plus reasonable attorney's fees. The exact number, down to the $27. They had not rounded up. They had not rounded down. They had written it with the cents. Someone had wanted the cents. The contract sat between us like a pot left on low, quiet, but you could smell it starting to scorch. They had not asked me to be a surrogate. They had asked me to sign my way into a cage and paid a lawyer to forge the door. $118,000 if I ever said no. Not if I broke the contract, if I withdrew my agreement at any point. Which, as a paralegal, I understood to mean after my signature, every future no would cost me everything I had. My apartment, my car, my savings from the divorce settlement, my job, probably, once they came after my wages. They had wanted to make the no impossible. I looked down at the page. My thumbnail mark from Clause 10 was still there, a small white indent. I thought very briefly of clients I had seen dragged through similar traps, women who had signed in good faith and spent 5 years climbing out. I thought of my aunt's orchids on the windowsill. I thought of the blue ink pen in my purse, the pen she had given me at Christmas. I reached for my purse. For 14 years I had read contracts for a living. Most of them were boring. A small handful were weapons. This one had been typed by someone who had stopped pretending. Page 4 is where love stops being love and becomes collateral. I understood, without emotion, exactly what I was holding. Indemnification plus irrevocable waiver plus selection clause plus financial penalty equaled classic coercion architecture. Any judge would scrutinize it. Any halfway decent attorney would have refused to draft it. Any paralegal on their second week of training could have flagged it. It was a document designed not to be read. It was a document designed to be signed on an emotional evening in front of a family after a speech, after a hem, after a word like, oh. I looked briefly at Uncle Don. Uncle Don was studying the condensation ring his iced tea had left on my mother's tablecloth. He would not meet my eyes. He knew what was in his niece's folder. He had known when he drove in from the airport. He had known when he shook my hand on the porch. He had let it happen anyway. I did not feel rage. I felt the clean, cold clarity of a woman who understands she has been underestimated for 41 years. I did not know it yet, but by the time I reached into my purse, every relationship in that room was already ending. Some would end that night when I slid the folder back. Some would end by Tuesday morning when my sister chose her audience. Some would end over a longer arc in the slow way rooms empty out after a gas leak. I reached into my purse for the pen my aunt had given me at Christmas. Blue ink, fine point, unreturned. I uncapped the pen. The click was louder than it had any right to be. I did not look up. I found Clause 11 on page 4, the selection and rejection clause, the one that asked me to vacate a pregnancy if the child was the wrong gender. I drew a slow circle around it. Not fast, not angry, clean, even pressure, paralegal clean. The kind of circle you learn to draw around a clause a judge will need to see without ambiguity. I finished the circle. I set the pen down on top of the folder, diagonal, across the clause, the way a sealed witness mark is placed on an evidence document. I closed the folder. I slid it back across the tablecloth with 2 hands, the way you return a casserole dish, firm, polite, unbroken. I stood up. I picked up my purse. My sister's mouth opened. My mother's hand flew to her own throat. My father's eyes closed once, slowly, as if against a bright light. Trevor did not move. Uncle Don put down his iced tea. I did not raise my voice. I said exactly, I won't be signing this. I won't be discussing this. And I'd like us all to understand that I heard what each of you said tonight. I will not forget it. I walked around the table. I kissed my father on the forehead because my Aunt Lillian had once told me, in a cold barn in November, that dignity is the only thing you cannot take back once you spend it, and that you do not give up the chance to bless a man who has knotted himself into smaller and smaller rooms. My father did not look up. My mother made a small, breathy sound. Helena. I walked to the front door. In the living room, Ellie was still watching her movie. A giraffe was on the television. She did not turn her head. She did not see. I opened the door. I closed it behind me with one hand. I did not slam it. Behind me as I walked to my car, my sister made the first honest sound she'd made all evening. It was not a cry. It was a noise, a small, low animal noise. I heard it through the front door. I did not turn around. My sister asked me to give her a child. I gave her my silence instead, and my silence turned out to be louder. I drove home at exactly the speed limit, which in my family is what people do when they are furious. The chandelier faded in my rear view. The Easter sky was a flat early spring gray. I took Route 29 because it was longer, and I needed the long way. My hands on the steering wheel were steady. My face in the rearview mirror was... I checked twice. I did not look like a woman who had just walked out of a planned intervention. I looked like a woman on her way home from a ham dinner. My phone on the passenger seat began to buzz. Margaret, voicemail. 37 seconds. My mother, voicemail. 52 seconds. My father. Text. Please come back. Your mother is upset. My mother. Text. We need to talk about this like adults. Uncle Don. Silence. He would not call. He was calculating. There is a moment in every negotiation where the mask slips a quarter inch, and Margaret slipped at exactly 7:43 on Easter evening between the ham and the lemon cake. She had not been surprised by Clause 11. She had not been surprised by Clause 12. She had been surprised only by me. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat. I turned the radio on. I moved the dial until I found a low, steady voice. It was Patsy Cline on an AM station out of Terre Haute singing Crazy. I let Patsy Cline explain the rest of the evening to me. Her voice was the only one I was willing to take a call from. I passed the Clarendon Mills town sign. I did not go home yet. I turned left at the blinking yellow. My aunt's driveway was 10 minutes further. My aunt opened the door, took one look, and put the kettle on without a word. It was 9:04. The orchids on the windowsill caught the porch light. The kitchen smelled like cherry pie from the morning, reheated. I sat at her kitchen table. I laid my purse down. I told her about the folder, about the 18 pages of cardstock, about the line about family that my mother had rehearsed, about Uncle Don and his melting eyes, about the ham and its clothes and page 3's brand name vitamins. I told her about Clause 11. I told her about Clause 12. I told her I had drawn a circle. My aunt listened without interrupting. Her hands were folded on the table. Her wedding ring, which she had never taken off, caught the overhead bulb. When I was done, she said, "You did right." "Did I?" "Yes." She poured 2 cups of tea. "But it's not done yet, honey." I looked up. "Your sister printed that contract on 18 pages of cardstock," my aunt said. "She's going to need it to have been someone else's fault. She's going to need a story. Watch what she does by Wednesday." "What will she do?" "Oh," my aunt said, and the corner of her mouth moved. "She'll go public. She's her mother's daughter. And for those of you raising daughters who know how to read, teach them to read page 4 first." I stared into my teacup. "I photocopied it," I said after a long moment. "The contract before the weekend. I made a copy at the office on Friday. I had a bad feeling." My aunt smiled, slow and small. "Helena," she said, "you have always been your own aunt." One more move was coming. My aunt had said by Wednesday. She had been generous. It came by Tuesday morning. My sister waited 37 hours, which for my sister is discipline. Tuesday morning, 7:04. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Delia, my paralegal friend from the office, a screenshot. "Is this about you?" I sat up. I read it. Margaret had posted a long, performative paragraph to Facebook. She had not named me. She had described me. A close family member, someone I loved, someone I trusted, someone who, after years of being supported by our family, had chosen, in what Margaret called a deeply painful moment, her own comfort over our family's dream. Margaret wrote about 10 years of trying, about her body, about her faith, about forgiveness, which she said she was, quote, actively working toward. 31 comments already. 3 cousins had liked it. A woman named Kelsey Marin from Margaret's book club had written, "I am so sorry for what you're going through." Margaret had replied with a red heart. My mother had shared the post above a caption, "We are heartbroken, but we trust God." Not a single word was untrue. Not a single word was honest. A statement on Facebook is not a confession, but in my family it was the closest thing we had to one. I made coffee. I read the post 3 times. I read the comments twice. I took a long breath. I texted Delia back. "Can you come over tonight? I need help redacting an 18-page contract." She replied inside of 20 seconds. "You want me to go scorched earth?" I said, "No, I want you to help me go paralegal." She said, "On my way after work, bringing Sharpies." I put the phone down. Aunt Lillian had said by Wednesday. Aunt Lillian had been generous by exactly 1 full day. Delia came over at 7:15 with a box of black Sharpies and a bottle of something neither of us was supposed to have on a work night. My kitchen table became a workroom. I laid out the photocopy I had made on Friday afternoon on the firm's copier between 2 client files. 18 pages. Cream cardstock rendered on bright office-grade white, legible in every line. We worked page by page, every name redacted, every address redacted, every signature line redacted, the law firm's letterhead redacted, Uncle Don's initials on page 2 redacted, the intended mother's full legal name redacted, what we left legible, the body text, every clause number, every specific word of coercion, the phrase altruistic gestational surrogacy, the word irrevocably, the phrase sole discretion, the phrase termination of carriage, the phrase 11 and 8 427 plus reasonable attorney's fees. The language alone told the story. The language was the indictment. At 10:40, I began drafting a statement. I gave myself 180 words. I did not mention my sister. I did not mention my mother. I did not mention family. I wrote, "This is a gestational surrogacy contract I was handed at a family dinner printed on cardstock and asked to sign that same evening without independent counsel. I am a paralegal. I recognize the language on page 4 as coercive. I am sharing this contract, fully redacted of any identifying information, because I believe other women in my community need to know what language to watch for. Please read page 4. Delia read it once, twice. She said, "Helena, that is the nicest 18 pages of murder I have ever seen." I said, "Thank you." By midnight, we had 18 pages of black bars and 1 small number, 11 and 8 $427, left legible, because numbers, in my experience, are the only part of a contract that cannot hide. Wednesday, 8 o'clock in the morning, I hit post, Facebook first, LinkedIn second, then an anonymous thread on a legal advice forum. I did not tag anyone. I did not name anyone. I attached the redacted PDF and my 180 words. I made a second cup of coffee. I went to work. You mothers out there who have ever wanted a child so badly, you forgot the child was a person. Pause there. Please, pause right there. By 10 o'clock, the Facebook post had 400 shares. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, it had 3,000. By Thursday morning, a local reporter from the Clarendon Mills Gazette had emailed me. A reproductive rights attorney from Indianapolis had shared the post with the caption, "This is a masterclass in why independent counsel matters." A family law podcast from Minneapolis had messaged me through LinkedIn. I did not respond to any of them. I sent everything to Delia. Delia said, "I'll handle the media. You handle your tea." In Clarendon Mills, the comments turned quickly. A woman named Brenda wrote, "This is the contract in Margaret Caldwell's Facebook post from yesterday. I recognize the 11 and 8427 number. I don't know what to say." Another wrote, "I went to school with Margaret. She's a principal. This cannot be her." A third, "This is her. She talked about IVF at PTA last year." Margaret's Tuesday post disappeared by Thursday afternoon. My mother's share disappeared an hour later. Uncle Don blocked me on Facebook, LinkedIn, and pointedly Venmo. My Aunt Lillian called Thursday evening. She said only, "I'll have a cherry pie ready Saturday." By Thursday night, my sister had deleted 7 years of Facebook. My mother had deleted 1. My phone had not stopped buzzing for 16 hours. I did not answer it. I put the kettle on. Thursday evening, 6:47. A knock. I opened the door. Trevor stood on my landing in the clothes he wore to sell surgical equipment to hospitals. Gray slacks, navy polo, company lanyard still looped around his neck. Trevor arrived in the uniform he wore to sell surgical equipment to hospitals, which was, I thought, about the right uniform. He was holding nothing. "Helena," he said, "I'm not here to apologize for her." I did not invite him in. I did not close the door either. "I'm here," he said, "because I should have said something at that table. I knew. I knew on page 3. I knew before page 3. He did not look up from his shoes. "Your mother drafted most of Clause 11, he said. "She told Margaret it was leverage. She said if you had an out, you would take it, and we needed to close the out." I wrote that word down in my phone that night. Leverage. I wrote it, and I did nothing with it. I watched his jaw work. "Trevor." "Yes." "Why are you telling me this?" He looked up. "Because I have been married to my wife for 14 years, he said. "And last Sunday at that table, I realized I do not know her." Silence for a moment. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "You should tell yourself now." He blinked. "That's what I mean," I said. "Say it to yourself." Out loud, later, in the car. "I'm not the one who needs it." He nodded. He did not cry in my doorway. He waited until he reached the stairwell. I heard him there for a minute. I did not go after him. I closed the door. I turned the deadbolt. I put the kettle on. Trevor was in a Marriott by Friday evening, which in our town is the geographic definition of gone, Delia told me. Delia had a cousin who worked the front desk. Delia knew everything in our town within 36 hours of it happening, which is a paralegal trait and a small-town trait combined, and both of those things had kept me alive that week. Saturday afternoon, my sister called. Not voicemail, not text. Called. I let it ring 4 times. Then I answered. "Helena." Her voice was not crying. Her voice was furious. "You destroyed my marriage." I did not sit down for this. I stood at my kitchen counter. The kettle was cooling on the burner. "No, Maggie." "Don't call me Maggie." "No, Margaret, I did not destroy your marriage. You drafted Clause 11 with our mother. I just read it out loud." A long silence. "You are a vindictive person, Helena. I want you to know that." I considered, in the long second that followed, a dozen things I could have said. I could have listed every time she had taken a story of mine and rewritten it. Every dinner she had sat silent while our mother talked past me. Every handshake Trevor had given me nervously at Christmas. I did not list any of it. I said, "Goodbye, Margaret." I hung up. A family like ours is a pie crust. Too much handling and the whole thing cracks, and there is no putting it back together with ice water. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel powerful. I felt tired in the particular way you are tired after you have done a task you have waited 41 years to do. I poured water over a tea bag. I thought, "No, Maggie, you put Clause 11 on page 4. I just used a pen." Before I tell you what my father said to me that Sunday, the first honest thing I had heard from him in 41 years, I want to say this to you. If anyone in your life is trying to make a no impossible for you with a document, a guilt trip, or a history book they wrote themselves about your life, you are allowed to read it slowly. You are allowed to hand it back. You are allowed to leave. And if this story is helping you keep your own spine warm tonight, hit like, leave a comment, and stay with me. There's one more thing you need to hear. Now, Sunday, exactly 1 week after Easter, my father came to my apartment alone. No overcoat, no wife. My father did not come to my apartment alone. Not in 11 months. Not in the 4 years before that. My father did not come anywhere alone. I let him in. I pointed at the second-hand sofa. I made him coffee. He sat with his hands flat on his knees, the way he sat in church. "I read what you posted," he said. "I read it 3 times, and your mother has been telling me all week that you were being ungrateful." And I nodded, Helena. I nodded. He was not crying. His voice had a small shake in it that was not a performance. "I nodded for 41 years, he said. I did not answer. I did not know what answer would be useful. He looked at his coffee. "Tonight," he said, "I am telling your mother that I will not sit at a table where something like that folder is allowed. I want you to know. I wanted you to know before I told her." We drank coffee in silence for 11 minutes. I counted. It was the longest conversation we had ever had. Summer came. My apartment got light until 9 o'clock. I taught myself to bake bread badly, and then, after a while, less badly. 3 months after Easter, my father moved out of the master bedroom. He did not move out of the house. He moved into the guest room that had, until that week, been my mother's sewing room. My mother did not comment on it. My father did not either. Aunt Lillian came to my apartment every Sunday, orchids in one hand, a pie in the other. She watered my windowsill plants without asking. She brought me cuttings. Margaret went silent. She did not post again. She did not call. In June, the school board at Eastview Elementary, where Margaret was principal, chose to pursue a new direction for the next academic year. Parents at the April board meeting had, apparently, raised concerns about the social media post. The board did not cite me. They did not cite the contract. They did not cite anything by name. They simply did not renew her. I did not celebrate. People who post a statement don't want a conversation. They want the last word typed in bold. Margaret's last word, in the end, was the silence she kept after losing her audience. My mother called once. One voicemail, 11 seconds. "I hope you're happy, Helena." I deleted it without replying. There was no answer to that sentence that would not have cost me something. One Saturday in August, Delia took me out for my birthday. We sat in a booth at a diner on Route 29. She ate pie. I ate pie. She asked offhand over the last bite, "Helena, have you ever thought about adoption?" I had been waiting 11 months for someone to ask me the question I had not been allowed to ask myself. I began the home study that September, foster to adopt through the county. A caseworker named Joanne Reinhold, 53, a retired high school counselor with warm hands and a ballpoint pen. She clicked while she thought. I filled out every form twice. I read the consent documents 3 times. I read the foster placement policies with the same attention I would have given a Clause 11. I was not taking chances. I told my Aunt Lillian first. She cried. My Aunt Lillian does not cry. She cried into a dish towel at her sink and then said, "I'll need to put up a second shelf for the orchids." I told my father next. He said, "I will be there for every appointment you let me come to." I did not let him come to all of them. I let him come to 3. It was enough. I told Delia. She said, "I already knew. I'm buying the crib." I did not tell my mother. I did not tell my sister. The branch of my family that had tried to rent my body was not going to be told about the daughter I was trying to find. Let me tell you something about the word no. No is a complete sentence. No does not require a footnote. No does not owe anyone a casserole, a Christmas card, or an explanation at length. In my experience, the people who demand you justify a no are the same people who were never going to accept the justification. So, at 41 years old, with my own apartment and my own name back, I stopped explaining. In the middle of my home study, Joanne asked me, "Helena, do you have a support system?" I thought about the orchids on the windowsill. I said, "A small one and the right one." She wrote that down. 14 months after Easter, a Tuesday afternoon in June, the community room in the County Services Building, 2nd floor, tired gray carpet, good afternoon light through the west windows. She was 3 years old. She was wearing a pink dress with a button missing. Her shoes had white scuffs on the toes. Her hair was in 2 uneven braids, done by a foster mother named Carol, who had braided more hair in her life than anyone I had ever met, and who would text me later that year the first photograph of my daughter she had ever taken. Her caseworker was Joanne. She was wearing a pink dress with a button missing, and she looked at me the way an auditor looks at a spreadsheet. I had brought a stuffed giraffe. I had been keeping it in the passenger seat of my Corolla for a week, waiting for this afternoon. The giraffe had a floppy neck and one slightly crooked eye. I had picked it out of a thrift store in Bloomington on a Saturday after I spent an hour touching every stuffed animal on a shelf and putting them down again. I knelt down, not too close. She was studying me. "Hi," I said. "I'm Helena. I brought you a giraffe. Do you like giraffes?" She considered the giraffe. She considered me. She considered the question. She said, "It's soft." I said, "I know." That was our first conversation. She took the giraffe. She held it by one ear. She did not smile exactly. She did a small thing with her mouth that was not a smile, and was also not a smile. Joanne looked at me. Joanne's eyes were wet. She did not say anything. She clicked her pen once. I did not know yet that by October she would call me Mom. I did not know yet that by Christmas I would not be able to remember what my apartment sounded like without her. I only knew, sitting on tired gray carpet with a 3-year-old evaluating a stuffed giraffe, that something I had not been allowed to hope for was beginning to happen anyway. January. 21 months after Easter, County Courthouse, 2nd floor, Judge Maribel Hartwell presiding. A woman of about 65 with silver hair pinned back and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She had done 3 adoptions that week. Ours was the last of the afternoon. Present in the small courtroom, me, Leona, 3.5, in a yellow dress that had never been worn before, and a pair of shiny shoes she kept looking down at. My Aunt Lillian, now 73, in a wool coat the color of a robin's egg. My father, Richard Barrett, who had driven himself. Delia in the back row with a camera. Joanne. Carol, the foster mother, who had asked to come. Absent, pointedly absent. My mother, my sister, Uncle Don. None of them had been invited. None of them had tried to come. Judge Hartwell spoke gently, the way judges speak at adoption hearings when they have done it enough times to know it is a sacred kind of paperwork. She asked Leona, "Are you ready to officially be Leona Barrett?" Leona nodded very seriously. "Yes." The judge smiled. She signed. Delia took a photograph I still keep on my refrigerator. In the hallway afterward, my Aunt Lillian handed me a small pot with a white orchid in it, not yet in bloom, a tight green bud just showing. "She'll need one of her own," my aunt said. My father picked Leona up. It was the first time he had picked up a grandchild in 8 years. His hands were careful on her back. He said to her, "Hello, granddaughter." She put her cheek on his shoulder. I said quietly to my aunt, I the opposite of what they asked me. I became a mother without them." My aunt squeezed my hand. "No, honey," she said. "You became a mother because of what you refused. Those are not the same." I did not answer. I held the orchid. I watched my father rock my daughter gently in the hallway light. I had been somebody's potential vehicle at Easter. In January, I was somebody's mother. A Saturday morning, 3 months after the courthouse, my kitchen. The sun coming through the window over the sink, the way it had come in every Saturday morning for almost 3 years. The kettle on, a new yellow dress hanging on a peg by the back door for the afternoons when Leona decided she wanted to wear it again. She was at the table with a board book, a book about a little brown rabbit who lost a shoe and found it and put it back on. She was narrating it to herself in the serious voice children use when they are translating the world. The orchid my aunt had given her was on the windowsill. It had bloomed. It would bloom again. I poured water over a tea bag. I thought about clauses. I thought about folders. I thought about chandeliers bought for funerals and dining rooms where one woman ate alone on one side of a table while 4 people sat on the other. I thought about my aunt, who had kept a sentence inside her for 53 years, and who had finally said it, and who had lived long enough to see a niece refuse to become her. A kind woman is not a soft woman. She is a woman who has chosen every morning not to become the people who hurt her. I chose it 41. I have been choosing every morning since. If this story landed somewhere in you tonight, if you've ever been handed a folder, a guilt trip, or a history someone else wrote for you, I want you to know I am glad you stayed to the end. Leave a comment below with the name of the woman in your life who taught you to read page 4. Tap subscribe if you haven't yet. And there is another story waiting for you in the description about a mother-in-law, a Thanksgiving, and a set of keys she did not expect me to bring back. Come back tomorrow. I'll put the kettle on.